am hardly of lochragus mishkur toirish guyana ma chasad doig sé for me a doirish ger Margarina rua on Margarina rua on Margarina rua tadana on Margarina rua in the Lisa locher scar of washing.
Good morrow, fox.
Good morrow, sir.
Pray, what is that you're eating?
A fine fat goose I stole from you, and will you come and taste it? And Margarina rua, 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 and Margarina rua tadana, and Margarina rua in the Lisa locher, the sparrow washing. Oh no, indeed. If I should puke it in a her.
But if I once swear you'll dearly pay for my fine fat goose you're eating.
On Margarina rua, 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 on Margarina rua tadana, on Margarina rua in the Lisa locher, the sparrow washing all day. Ní bhlaisiad pegus ní ísod giob.
Bis ní rock again smudge my velda.
But I vow and swear you'll dearly pay for my fine fat goose you're eating. On Margarina rua, 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 on Margarina rua tadana, on Margarina rua in the Lisa locher, the sparrow washing. Ma chillig voor de vraag is ma charke wie gehaling is ma lachen vlogge a beire wie een erin. On Margarina rua, 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 on Margarina rua tadana, on Margarina rua in the Lisa locher, the sparrow washing. Tally ho len a bone, tally ho len a bone, tally ho len a bone, achulanin. Tally ho len a bone, tally ho len a bone, as far as in order.
Hello and a very warm welcome to Voyage Around My Brain. My name is Karen Meenan and I'm delighted to be back with you here in Near FM. Voyage Around My Brain is a brand new series sharing knowledge and experience about brain health. The Atlantic Fellows for Equity in Brain Health provides innovative training in leadership, dementia prevention and brain health to promising leaders around the globe from all sorts of backgrounds, including medicine, research, neuroscience and the arts. Over the next few weeks, I'll be chatting to some of these experts from the Global Brain Health Institute. They'll explain to us in very simple language what they've learned over the years of their studies. And also in studio, we'll have our own experts, people from the community who live with dementia or who care for people affected by memory loss. Our first song, On Madreen Rua by John Spillane, is one of my favourite bilingual songs and one I remember well learning in Scolania National School back in the 70s. Over the next hour or so, we'll hear favourite songs chosen by our guests and they'll also be invited to recite their favourite poem. So if you think you'd like to join us in studio as our next community expert to share your story about brain health, we'd be delighted to hear from you. In a little while, we're going to meet one of the world's leading language experts, Dr. Adolfo Garcia. Adolfo specialises in the neuroscience of language and social interaction. He also serves as co-director of the Cognitive Neuroscience Centre in Argentina. He's also adjunct researcher at the National Scientific and Technical Research Council and director of the Matters in Language and Cognition in Argentina. Adolfo has published over 170 scientific works and offered more than 150 presentations at academic meetings. His first song choice this evening is The 16 Men of Tain. That was The 16 Men of Tain by Alan Holdsworth, taken from his 10th album of the same name, which was released in March in 2000, and it is the song choice from our first guest, neuroscientist Dr. Adolfo Garcia. Adolfo, you're very welcome to Voyage Around My Brain here in Near FM.
Very, very glad to be here, and what a great opening. I mean, just listening to Alan shredding that guitar, it couldn't be any better.
So tell us, why did you choose that song as your opening number?
Alan Holdsworth was, but still is, a major guiding light for me. He is, you might say, a guitarist's guitarist. He single-handedly revolutionized the way in which people can think about the guitar as a means of expression, and he was a master improviser, as we could hear here on this song. And I guess that he did influence me in many ways musically, as a guitarist back in the day, but I guess that the one lesson I drew from him is that you should never be content with what's already out there. He was a person who broke boundaries, who really thought outside the box, and my attempts are feeble in comparison to what he actually achieved. This was a major milestone for me, not just in terms of music, but in my life in general.
Wow. Because I didn't know much about him, Adolfo, to be honest with you, and I Googled him, and I was fascinated. His dad was a jazz pianist, and they weren't very well off. He had a guitar, he picked up the guitar at the age of 17, but he did like the saxophone, and his family couldn't afford a saxophone, so he decided to riff on the guitar and see if he could get a saxophone sound by doing that, and the result is amazing. So what an interesting guy.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, he and his family were never well off. It was very sad to see that this absolutely legendary and groundbreaking musician died. He actually died in California in 2017 without being actually well off, unfortunately. It was also very touching to see the musicians community do a fundraiser for his funeral. And I guess that the impact that his departure had was just a testament to the impact that he had in his lifetime. Yes, he really showed that the guitar could be something different from what people would take it could be. And yes, and his influences were actually, he was a major jazz fan. He tried to approach guitar as if it were a saxophone, which is a very unusual thing to do, just because these are instruments that are designed in very different ways. So he has to come up with techniques that nobody had come up with before, and he just really reinvented the wheel there.
Lovely. And actually, that's a great intro to the next bit, is why we're doing this show, Voyage Around My Brain. We're trying to find different and more interesting ways of sharing our information and our knowledge about memory loss. And just to give our listeners a little more information about what you've done, you've received a recognition from the Buenos Aires Parliament for your study on Parkinson's disease. You've made one of the top 10 scientific breakthroughs in Argentina, and you've received numerous awards for your research over the years. So as a professor, you've taught undergraduate, graduate and professional development courses in Argentina, Chile, Colombia, USA, Germany and China. So, Adolfo, in all the years that you've studied the brain, can you please tell our listeners what are the top things that you've learned about the brain, and what would you like to share with us this evening?
All right. I guess I'll be answering the latter question. I've learned many things. It's hard to rank them, but I'll tell you the ones that I have in my mind right now.
Okay.
One of them is that, as you might expect, the brain is a very complex thing, and this means that there are so many dimensions. Think about even the most trivial, the littlest thing you do in your everyday life. Moving a finger, recognizing a bird chirping, or whatever it might be. Those little instances that take but a portion of a second, and we just take for granted, they involve a myriad of brain processes cutting across many different dimensions. It involves different regions of the brain, which become activated and which become co-activated in different ways. It involves different patterns of electrical and chemical activity, many complex things. And of course, there is also why it is that you were moving your finger in the first place. What were you trying to achieve? Or what was the context in which you were listening to that bird chirping? And what is that the first time you heard that bird, or is it the bird that you always listen to when you are starting your morning off to have breakfast. And what this taught me is that because of its complexity and because it involves so many dimensions, the final answer to what the brain is, how it works, how it changes, how it ceases to function, will never be provided by any single discipline. Because there are so many dimensions to it, you require transdisciplinary perspectives. So the only way in which we can try to come up with reasonable answers to our questions about the brain is by bringing together experts from many, many different fields. And what maybe perhaps not be so obvious is that these experts must not be only experts in brain science. We need to bring people in from many, many, many different fields, including social sciences, the humanities, economics, and then, of course, the harder and more brain-centered sciences. But it's something that now seems natural to me, but it was a discovery. At first, I thought that the brain was only a matter of neurologists, and then I realized that it's a matter that should concern, and in fact, fortunately, does concern experts from many, many different fields.
Absolutely, and including the arts, which I'm just so delighted that in GBHI that it does include people who have backgrounds in the arts, because it's such an important part of our brain that we exercise the music we like, why we like it, and that, as Alan Holdsworth, who he wanted to play the saxophone, he couldn't afford it, so he tried to replicate those sounds on a guitar. But one of my favourite art forms is poetry. So I had asked you, Adolfo, to dust off a favourite poem. Did you find one that you really liked that you'd like to share with us this evening?
Indeed, yes, I did.
Okay, great. What is it?
It's called One Art by Elizabeth Bishop.
Okay, I know her, yes. So, go for it.
Fantastic. So, One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day. Accept the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names, and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved houses went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster some realms I owned, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, a disaster.
That's a good one. So, Adolfo, that's one I'm familiar with. So why did you choose that poem?
It was, again, a little journey of discovery for me. One of the things that I'm particularly drawn to in art is organizing, sequencing, rearranging well-known elements in novel ways. And this happened to be the very first villanelle I read in my life. A villanelle is a particular type of poem in which you have these repeating lines, right, which can appear at different parts of a stanza. Some of them can work as a refrain. And there was something about having the same phrase and, locating it in different places and with different contexts, and in a way re-signifying what is essentially the same sentence each time you read that was just fascinating for me. But then, beyond that little, that formal playground that the villanelle offers, I began to, let's say, unveil different layers of meaning in this particular poem. And there's something about the growing intensity of the losses that are recounted here. First beginning with very minor things, and little by little building up to more important things. and there's something that attests to how we can adapt, and how we can learn, and how the lessons that we can derive from these smaller losses early in life then sort of become the backbone for us to deal with, accept, and interpret more important losses as we go by. I guess that's one of the things. I could go on for sure, but
what I loved about it was that her ability to turn it into a put down. You know, that the art of losing isn't hard to master. You know, I've lost all sorts of things. I've lost keys. I've lost my mother's watch. I've lost cities. So losing you isn't such a big deal. You know, I just really like the way she was able to phrase the whole thing, that it isn't a disaster. So it's a brilliant poem and so many layers in it. And I'm so glad you chose it, because I haven't read that one in a long, long time. But there's one research award that I was particularly interested in that you got. And now you got loads of them. But this was the one you got from Canada and the USA. And it was about functional and anatomical organisation of translation routes into the bilingual brain. Now, can you please explain to us in very simple English what that is? Because I'd like to introduce in a few moments our guest who has a bilingual question that we're going to talk about. So can you maybe have a chat with us about what was that award that you won in Canada and the USA?
Definitely. I'll do it in my simplest Argentinian English.
Which is very good, by the way.
But one of the wonders of the human brain is that it enables you to connect information and to connect skills. And it just so happens that well over 50% of the world's population would fall under the category of bilingual, or rather we should say multilingual. That is to say, people who have functional abilities to communicate at a given level of competence in more than one language. And one of the things that bilingualism entails, and this is something that separates bilinguals or multilinguals from monolinguals, is the capacity to reformulate messages across languages. This is something that a strictly monolingual person who has no knowledge whatsoever of a second language can do. And so translation, in any of its guises, when you think about translating a written text in one language as a written text in another language, or when you're engaging in sight translation or in simultaneous interpretation or consecutive interpretation, this involves back and forth between languages that both linguistically and neurocognitively has always been very, very interesting to me, perhaps because my very first degree was in translation. One point when I realized that my passion for language needed to be complemented with insights from brain science, it was only natural that I should try to find bridges between translation and the brain, and that led to a research line that we've been forging over the last 10 years, I should say, or probably even a little bit more than that, in which we're trying to see two things, basically. The first one is how the human brain handles this particular exercise of going back and forth between languages that translation and interpreting entail. And the second one is, what does sustained practice of this ability do to your brain? So there's this circular relation between the two questions, and it's a very fun thing to study, actually.
Wow. So we're going to talk more about that in a few minutes. I just would like to introduce my second guest. But before I do, I'd like to introduce your second piece of music. So can you tee it up for us and tell us why you choose this one?
All right. Well, this second piece is by, again, one of my personal heroes, Astor Piazzolla. He's one of the best-known composers from Argentina around the world, and he has influenced generations of composers from many, many different genres, and he was also someone who was not satisfied with the mainstream and the way things operated in his milieu. In particular, he revolutionized what tango music was all about, and this actually stirred quite an ardent debate in Argentina regarding whether Piazzolla's music was actually tango or not, to the extent that he ended up saying, look, I'm not really gonna bother myself too much with those definitional things. Let's just call it the music of Buenos Aires.
Oh,
and I believe
fantastic.
That's a very good way of putting it.
Okay, well, on that note, the music of Buenos Aires, it's Primavera. Is that how, am I pronouncing that correctly? Primavera Porteña by Astor Piazzolla. Is that right?
Wonderful. That's that's actually the spring of Buenos Aires, and this belongs to Piazzolla's Four Seasons Suite.
Okay, well, here we go. Wow, that was Primavera Porteña by Astor Piazzolla, the leading composer from Argentina, also known as the world's foremost composer of tango music. That was the song choice of our first guest, Adolfo Garcia. And now I'd like to introduce you to Kate Murphy, another brain health expert living in our community. Kate was the primary carer for her mother Margaret, who developed dementia in her 70s. Margaret had attended an all-Irish primary school, or Gael school. As her dementia progressed, she started to lose the use of her English language and only spoke in Irish in her latter years. Kate is a mother and grandmother who left a flying career in Aer Lingus to pursue a degree in Irish Studies at Trinity College. This was a multidisciplinary degree with modules in Irish history and English, and also contributions from the wider range of disciplines including geography, genetics, theatre and film studies. Kate, you're most welcome to Voyage Around My Brain. Thanks for joining us in studio.
Thank you for having me, Karen.
Listen, we were having a chat last week about this show, and one of the things you mentioned about your mum was, most remarkably, she lost her English words and could only communicate in Irish towards her latter years. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes, as her dementia progressed, she tended to become non-verbal, and any verbal that she did have was primarily Oscuelga in Irish. Phrases such as Gohintach, Gohalan, Sishius, Guramahagoth, the simple Irish phrases that we would have been used to as children growing up. It was always her preferred language. But she was not a Gaeilgeoir by any manner of means. But as the dementia progressed and she got older, this is what she fell into.
That's mad interesting, isn't it? And you were telling me as well that in the nursing home, most of the staff were either Eastern European or African or Asian, and they didn't understand Irish. And like most of the Irish people, native-born Irish people, didn't understand either, which is mad because I know only 3% of us speak fluently. But what difficulties did that pose?
Well, what we would have done was we would have put templates up in her bedroom, to say like Eva or, good morning, Oscuelga, simple phrases for the staff to become familiar with the English translation. And in that way they could communicate with her very simply in short Irish phrases. So we had all the foreign staff speaking Irish, and as she did, I also encourage other residents within the nursing home to use their little bit of Irish that they had.
Yeah, that's wonderful, isn't it? She was like a one-woman Irish rejuvenation person. So we heard Adolfo was speaking about language and bilingualism and multilingualism. So if you had any tips to give to somebody who was going back, perhaps somebody who has come to our shores since the 1990s or late 80s, who is not a native Irish speaker or a native English speaker and speaks in a foreign language at some point in the future, what tips would you give them? Was it frightening for you when it happened, first of all?
It wasn't frightening for me because I knew the Cúpla Focal and I had the words, but for like the foreign carers that were coming into the house we had her at home for a period of time, it would have been quite difficult for them and for them to work with her or to help her. So, like as I say, sheets of paper with translations on them, speak to them in Irish, the little phrases we had to speak to them, to encourage them to speak it. And I suppose just to familiarise yourself with the basic phrases in language. A copy of Bunta's Caintear is worth its weight in gold.
Oh, fantastic. Now, earlier in the programme we heard Adolfo recite One Art by Elizabeth Bishop, which is actually one of poems that I had really liked and I'd forgotten all about it. I love it. Did you bring a poem in with you this evening, and what one are you going to share with us?
I did. I brought in the Irish poem Queen Kilcash. The reason...
Oh, I like this one too.
The reason I did pick this was it would be a poem that my mother was familiar with. It was one that I also learnt in school. And if anybody asked me to say an Irish poem or recite an Irish poem, this would be the first one that would come to mind.
Okay, well, I like so.
Now, this I would have learnt as a song in school. I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to inflict that on your listeners. But the air apparently it was collected by George Petrie. He was an artist, antiquarian, archaeologist and a collector of folk music, and the air was published in 1885 to the poem. But as I say, I'm just going to recite it. It's about, it's the lament for Kilcash. It mourns the death and time of Margaret Butler, Lady Ivy. The castle of Kilcash was the chief seat of one of the branches of the Butler family well into the 18th century.
All right. So if you would recite it, I know that song. I'm going to see if I can find it, and maybe we can have a few verses of the poem followed by the music. How about that?
Lovely.
Brilliant. Off you go.
Queen Kilcash. Cer the einfmid fasta gan aimid, tá deireadh na ghuilte lór, ní trocht Kilcash ná teaglach is ní banfar chlán go bra. An áit the gcónaí an deimhán fó gradam is mar har maná, bíag éirlí hectarin har tánán is an tafran bin ará. Tá cio ag titim chréimh ann, Now glan le green no law, to smut the titum on spare on. is a cuid isce go léir ag trá. Níl col, níl cuilan, níl cuera an, a clocha agus méchlachan. Pork na faríise gan chrévan is dimig an géin cún fáin. A tí vire sa rísa go dogus sí a rís hunslán. Go mé gorinci fad ag ggóil timppel ce bhailan is tinta canáf. Go dóg from bailise ar sinseir ce cais frá a rís go hard. Is go brach na go juki an dilán, ní ag farí a rís arlár.
Cad a dhéan mi fasta gan maimod, a der ma gael lor. Ní a troch that gael chais na tailo, ní chlyn for a klein go bro. Jod na goni a chandaiban, fuer prada mis meir har vlog. Vi yearly padding tar kainon, some pafer and bain baro.
Sean O'Shea bhí conna Kilcash an sin agus rih sin chulamar an don Kilcash árá ag Kate Murphy. That was Kilcash sung for us now by Sean O'Shea, and before that we heard a poem Kilcash read for us by our studio guest, Kate Murphy. Kate, we were having a chat last week about Voyage Around My Brain, and you told me that one of your favourite songs was True Love by Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? This is a very eclectic show altogether.
I can certainly, Karen. It's from the film High Society, which was released in 1956. It was also the year that my mum and dad were married.
Oh.
So it has that particular resonance. And my mum modelled herself, I think, on Grace Kelly, as a lot of women did in that era.
Yeah.
And again, there is an Irish connection with Grace Kelly, whose grandfather emigrated from Mayo to Philadelphia in the late 1800s.
Okay, so we're going to play a bar of it now.
Suntan, windblown, honeymooners at last alone, feeling far above par. Oh, how lucky we are, while I give to you and you give to me. True love, so on and on it'll always be. True love, for you and I have a guardian angel on high, with nothing to do but to give to you and to give to me. Love forever true, for you and I have a guardian angel on high, with nothing to do but to give to you and to give to me. Love forever true. Love forever true.
That was True Love by Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly. Absolutely gorgeous. And now I'd like to bring back in Adolfo. Adolfo, welcome back.
Here I am listening to this wonderful music and also pondering on the wonders of translation to prevent losing the opportunity to, access to that piece of culture, of Irish culture that was embedded in the poem you just shared with us.
Mm. So what I was going to ask you, Adolfo, because musically we've been around the world and your music choices are spectacular. Thank you for sharing them with us. What is it? When I ask you and when I ask Kate to pick a favourite poem and a favourite song, you immediately think of something that is very important to you. So what is hardwired into our memories and what's the science behind why do we pick a particular song or a particular poem? What's the science behind that?
It's a very, very complicated and complex matter, but somebody might think that the things that stick with you the longest are the ones that you've experienced earliest in life, perhaps, the ones that you've been more systematically exposed to. And although those two things may play a role, it's really not the main thing. The affective context in which something happens is a key determinant of what's going to really, last long in your memory and what won't. It's very hard to. This is easier to see when you are dealing with a very extreme experience. For example, if you have a moment of elation, like the happiest day of your life, the chemical and electrical and neurocognitive processes that are involved in that particular affective experience are likely to favor the retrieval of that information as time goes by. Not in any pristine form, but certainly so. And when it comes to art, something that I could say is that there's a period in life in which the music and the poetry and the literature that you're exposed to seem to be particularly penetrating, especially in your formative years as you are entering early adulthood.
Mm. So what you were saying there, like when I asked Kate what would be her favourite song, immediately she came up with True Love, and she told us the reason why. It was the year her parents married and they had a lovely relationship, and so she associates that song with all these wonderful memories. If you were to ask somebody a favourite time or a favourite song, oftentimes, because whenever I ask somebody for a favourite song, they often go back to the age of around 17 or 18. Why is that?
Again, that's a very systematic thing, and it's very, very hard to answer. We do have answers, but sometimes the explanations that we come up with are actually rationalizations that we propose after something has happened, and they may or not coincide with the specific reasons why something was relevant and memorable for a single individual or not. But something that we could say is that within that age range, there are many, many changes that have to do with building up your own identity, your sense of affiliation to certain groups in the world, your sense of rejection of certain things that you don't want to be. This is also a time in which peer pressure and the need for belonging or even for differentiating yourself from certain groups is critical, and music and art in general are pregnant with opportunities for self-identification and self-differentiation. There are also neuromaturational factors involved, ranging from the consolidation of different memory circuits, the ongoing development of prefrontal brain structures. There's a constellation of things that are going on by that period of life. And I guess that the one thing that we could say is that this takes me back to this idea that I mentioned about the brain and our minds being tremendously multidimensional, in the sense that any explanation that you want to provide for even the most the simplest thing, like why do you like this music better than this other type of art, requires looking at a very, very complex forest, although sometimes we may be drawn to providing explanation at the level of the single tree, right?
Okay. So, Adolfo, then just coming back to Kate's mammy, what happened to her brain that she went back to speaking Irish, a language that she had learnt as a little girl, didn't speak all her life, and then when she got dementia in her later years, it was only Irish and not English that she understood? What happened in her brain?
Well, I don't know what happened in her brain in particular. I can share some ideas with you regarding what we know about the experience of patients suffering from dementia and their linguistic abilities. But this is not a snobbish comment I'm making here, and I would like to take the opportunity to make a simple point that sometimes passes unnoticed, which is that when we are dealing with science, and when we have a theory about how the brain works or ceases to work, or how languages work or they cease to work, we have a theory. And a theory is by definition an abstraction. It is by definition something that sacrifices the detail of the individual in favor of the commonalities and the objectivity of what cuts across many, many cases. That is why sometimes a theory may be very good in general, but it may not be the most adequate tool to explain what happened to an individual patient. That being said, something that I think I can say with some certainty is that I would not speak about regression or going back to a language, because this would imply that somehow as if the patient had gone back to an earlier period, abandoning the present period. And that's not the way in which these cases are thought of. Something that we need to understand is that languages are appropriated differently depending on when you are exposed to them, how often you are exposed to them, and how competent you become in them. Typically, the languages that you're exposed to in your early life, ranging from intrauterine periods to early infancy, they tend to be acquired rather than learned. That is to say, our native language happens to us. We are surrounded by it. We are continually bombarded by the words and sentences of our parents and grandparents and caregivers, when our concerns in life are not acquiring the language. My son, for instance, he's now 15 months old, and he wants to play, and he wants to run, and he wants to be fed, and he's constantly being exposed to Spanish, but it is not his goal to acquire that language. The situation is quite different when you face another language at a later moment in your life. I don't know what the case was here in particular, but think, for example, about a language that you learn through schooling, and a language that you learn by being exposed to rules and patterns and pronouns, and boxes with pronouns and tables with words and things like that. That is what typically we refer to as learning rather than acquiring. And it just so happens that the brain circuits that are involved in one and another mode of incorporating linguistic information are differentially distributed in the brain. They involve different parts of the brain, to make it simple. And those different parts of the brain are differentially susceptible to the impact of neurodegeneration in dementia. So it has to do basically with how different forms of dementia may impact different parts of the brain that may play a different role for a later relative to an early learned language.
Wow. Fascinating stuff, Adolfo. Listen, thank you so much for sharing that information. I could listen to you all day. What I'd like to do, though, is just say a huge thank you to our studio guest, Kate Murphy, for sharing her experience of caring for a mother who lost her use of English and reverted to Cointas Gaeilge. And I'd like to say thank you to you, Adolfo, for sharing your knowledge of the brain on Near FM. We've one more song, and it's a choice of Kate. Kate, do you want to tell us, you've chosen a second song. Why did you choose this one?
I've chosen Life's Been Good by Joe Walsh because he's the bad boy of the Eagles and I like a bad boy. Who doesn't? I also hope with Adolfo's expertise in guitar that he liked the uplifting guitar intro.
Oh, yes.
And I think
Phenomenal.
Life is good, has been good, is good, and it continues to be good, even for people that are caring for people with dementia or people affected by brain health issues. There is so much in life to enjoy. The support of family, friends, extended family, nature, the arts, everything that's out there on offer. We have theatre, music, drama, poetry. Life is good, has been good, and will continue to be good.
Oh, lovely, Kate. I love those sentiments. And that's exactly it, Adolfo. Like, we could talk about the brain and brain health for a year and a day, and we will never get to really enjoy our lives unless we get out and connect with nature, with songs, with music, with poetry, with all the things that we used to love. We can still love them, and even if your loved one has memory loss. And in fact, if any of our listeners has memory loss or is caring for a relative with memory loss, and you'd like to share your experience on the radio, please do contact us on Near FM. Our text number is 087 69 44 500. We'd love to hear from you. Please join us again next Monday night from 7 to 8 p.m. We're going to meet another GBHI brain health expert and another person in our community who'll share their experience of living with dementia. And if you want to listen back to today's show, you can find the podcast on Near FM. You can find us on Twitter and on Facebook. Stay tuned to Near FM for JB on Ska Patrol from 8 to 10. And thanks for listening. And with this gorgeous song coming up, Life's Been Good by Joe Walsh, I'd like to say thank you to you, Adolfo.
Thank you very much. This was such a treat, Karen, and it was great listening to Kate as well. This is a wonderful initiative. I am thrilled, honored to have been a part of it. Thank you very much.
Well, we're delighted to have you all the way from Argentina in our studio, and Kate in studio.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you so much for having me on the show, and thank you, Adolfo. It was a pleasure listening to you.
And you know what?
On the contrary, my pleasure.
You know, and we're just going to have the best intro to the best song next, lads. We're going to enjoy this one. So this is Joe Walsh and Life's Been Good.
This